There is a quiet ache that moves like an underground river through the chambers of the empathetic soul. Not the wail of pain, not the roar of grief, but the fine, persistent mist that clings to the trees long after the storm has passed. It is the ache of one who feels not only their own sorrows, but carries, as if by some invisible inheritance, the sorrows of the world. You know this, don't you? The way the air thickens when another's suffering enters the room, the way your heart rearranges itself to hold what is not yours, and yet, somehow, becomes yours in the holding. Before we begin, take a moment to like and subscribe. The more you engage and stay with the content, the more YouTube shares these timeless insights with others. By doing so, you're not only helping this channel grow, but also spreading Carl Jung's transformative wisdom to those seeking meaning and inner truth. Let's dive into the depth of the psyche together. Let us speak of it, not as scholars dissecting a concept, but as dreamers exchanging symbols, as wanderers in the same forest of mirrors. I have walked among images and shadows, followed the scent of forgotten myths, and in my wanderings I have met the weary ones, not weary from toil or from the wounds of one single tragedy, but from the slow, holy bleeding of always being open. They are the unseen healers, the silent witnesses, the ones who sit so close to another's pain that their own bones begin to hum with it. And yet, over time, their sanctuary becomes a place they themselves are forbidden to rest in. It is not an ordinary fatigue, not the tiredness that sleep cures, but the deeper depletion of essence, the draining away of one's own psychic waters until the well runs low. The soul, though it stretches toward the eternal, is not endless in its human vessel, and empathy, when unmoored from the anchor of self-awareness, can drift into martyrdom wearing the mask of virtue. A dream once given to me by a young woman still burns in my memory. She told me she found herself in a hall made entirely of mirrors. But each mirror showed not her own face, it showed the faces of those she had loved, held, and soothed in their darkest hours. All of them wept, their tears struck the glass like rain, and their grief seeped toward her in waves. She sought the exit, but with every step the mirrors multiplied, and the hall stretched on without end. The door she thought she saw dissolved into yet another wall of mirrored sorrow, and her own reflection nowhere to be found. This is the image of the empath lost in the archetypal hall of suffering. To take in the pain of others without a tether to the self is to wander a labyrinth without a thread, to dissolve into 1,000 borrowed faces until your own is gone. And yet, empathy is not the enemy. It is one of the most luminous capacities of the human spirit. The golden bridge that links soul to soul, but every archetype contains its shadow. The healer carries their own wound. The lover harbors their own fear. The empath holds a threshold beyond which the gift becomes a snare. The very sensitivity that allows you to listen beyond words is the same force that can lead you to vanish behind another's story. Why? Because without the map of your own soul, you cannot tell where your being ends and another's begins. The unconscious, if left unlit, will pull you from empathy into enmeshment. You will begin to believe that another's pain is yours to own, to mend, to carry until your spine bows. You will offer yourself as an altar, forgetting that altars, too, need tending. And so the question emerges, quietly at first, then with the force of necessity. When did I begin to feel everything, and why does everything now weigh like stone? For many, the answer lies in a past long before the present moment, in the half-remembered corridors of childhood, in the generational wounds passed like heirlooms. Often the empath's gift is born from necessity, shaped in the crucible of early neglect, where to survive meant becoming exquisitely attuned to the shifting weather of another's moods. Empathy was first a survival instinct, only later a sacred offering. And yet, The body remembers its origins. As an adult, the empath still moves through the world as if each room might hold a hidden storm. Every conversation becomes an exchange of energies, every meeting a silent negotiation of invisible contracts. This merging is not always conscious. It is felt in the subtle ways: the heaviness in your limbs after listening to another's grief, the inexplicable sadness upon leaving a gathering, the tension in your chest from carrying an anger that isn't your own. And so the body begins to speak. It speaks in exhaustion, in the ache that lingers no matter how much you rest, in the dream that repeats until you pay attention. It speaks in the quiet rebellion of the nervous system, refusing to absorb one more drop of sorrow. But descent is only half the myth. Every journey into the underworld demands a return, and the return is marked by treasure, by transformation. Empathy, when paired with individuation, ceases to be self-erasure and becomes a sacred conduit, a channel through which connection flows without drowning the one who carries it. Individuation, as Jung knew, is the art of becoming what you are not, what others require. Not the echo of 1,000 wounded voices, but a soul standing in its own light. It is to offer compassion without surrendering your reflection to the hall of mirrors. The path forward begins not with withdrawal from the world, but with the drawing of the circle, the sacred boundary within which you can hear your own voice again. Within that circle, you remember that empathy is not the same as rescue, that feeling deeply does not mean you must be the vessel for every tide. In that remembering, you do not lose your gift, you refine it. You become a listener who is rooted, a witness who can stand beside another's pain without becoming its prisoner. You learn to touch the grief of the world with open hands, not clenched fists, and to release it back to the current when your part is done. And now, I invite you as one who walks with both the burden and the blessing of deep feeling to choose a number, not at random, but as a living symbol. Let it be the number of boundaries you have drawn to protect your sacred fire, or the number of times you have descended into another's darkness and returned with both your own name and theirs still intact. Perhaps it is the number that has followed you in dreams, the one whispered by an inner guide, the one that feels like a key. Place it in the comments below as you would place a candle on an altar, not to be explained, but to be known by those who have also walked the mirrored hall and found the door within themselves. And as these numbers gather, they will form a constellation, a silent testament that though we each carry our own reflection, we are not alone in the great work of returning to it. Let your number join the others, a single star among many, so that somewhere, someone still lost in the mirrors may look up, see the pattern, and know the way home. You must begin to notice when you leave yourself to dwell in the psyche of another. You must recognize the subtle shift, the tightness in your chest, the sudden emotional fog, the desire to fix, to rescue, to carry. These are signals. They are not commandments. You may choose not to follow them. You are not required to become a spiritual sponge. Your worth is not measured by how much sorrow you can absorb. Even the Christ archetype withdrew to the wilderness. Even the healer needs healing. The paradox is this: the more you honor your boundaries, the more potent your empathy becomes, because then it is no longer reactionary. It is no longer born of compulsion. It becomes a sacred offering, one you choose to give rather than one extracted from your being. I often said that the psyche is a self-regulating system like the body, and just as the body falls ill when overextended, the soul becomes weary when its boundaries are consistently transgressed. If you find yourself spiritually exhausted, it is not because you are broken. It is because your soul is speaking, and it is saying, "Come home. Come home to your center. Come home to your dreams, your symbols, your kit. Come home to the parts of yourself you have exiled in the name of compassion. Do not abandon your empathy, but let it be the river that flows through your being, not the ocean in which you drown. Let us pause here, not in silence, but in sacred stillness. the kind that speaks louder than words. For even in the hall of mirrors, there is always one pane of glass that shows your own reflection. You need only find it, and when you do, may you look upon your own face with the same tenderness you have so freely given to others. We continue then not as a lecture, but as a descent into that inner cathedral where the true work begins. You see, empathy unguarded becomes not merely fatigue, but possession. And this possession is not always by a spirit or some external force, but by the unconscious complexes that were never brought into the light. It is not uncommon for an empath to be possessed by the persona of the helper, the caretaker, the healer. But beware the persona, if fused with the ego, becomes a prison. The helper becomes trapped in helping. The caretaker becomes incapable of receiving care. The healer rejects their own wounds, and thus the cycle of spiritual exhaustion deepens. Not because the soul is weak, but because the self is being devoured by its own mask. You must understand that the psyche is layered. The conscious mind is but a leaf upon the vast ocean of the unconscious. Beneath every act of empathy lies a longing. Beneath every urge to rescue, a silent cry. Will anyone ever see me as I see others? And in that longing is the shadow, the part of you that has been denied, repressed, split off. The shadow does not disappear simply because you choose love. In fact, the more you suppress your own needs in the name of love, the stronger the shadow grows. I have witnessed this in dreams, in symbols, in the haunted eyes of those who have never permitted themselves to say no. The mother who feels responsible for every emotion in her family yet collapses behind closed doors. The spiritual teacher who holds space for others yet has never felt safe enough to grieve their own childhood. The lover who dissolves into their partner then awakens years later with no sense of who they are. This is the danger of unconscious empathy. It demands sacrifice but forbids reciprocation. And here we arrive at one of the most difficult truths I must share with you. One that you may resist but must ultimately confront. Not all empathy is holy. Not all feeling is truth. There are times when what you feel is not your own, but an inherited emotional pattern, a projection, an ancestral residue to distinguish what is used from what is not. This is the art of spiritual maturity. And that is why individuation, the great task of the second half of life, requires that we reclaim all parts of the self, not only the compassionate but also the angry, the tired, the selfish, the primal. These two are part of the sacred self. To deny them is not sanctity. It is repression, and repression always returns, not as peace but as symptoms. You may call it anxiety. You may call it burnout. I call it a call to awakening. We must ask, what archetype are you unconsciously living through? Are you the wounded healer endlessly attracting those who mirror your unhealed past? Are you the martyr convinced that to suffer for others is divine? Are you the orphan endlessly scanning the emotional landscape for safety in another's face? These are not merely roles. They are psychic blueprints, and if they are not examined, they become fate. But awareness shatters fate, and in its place, it gives you destiny. The difference is choice. Let me tell you of a woman who came to me many years ago. She was a therapist by profession, beloved by her clients, praised for her sensitivity. But inwardly, she was crumbling. She told me she felt as though her soul was leaking through the cracks in her skin. Every client's pain became her own. She wept for others, but could not cry for herself. Her dreams were filled with images of drowning ocean tides pulling her under rooms filling with water, faceless children screaming for help. When we explored these dreams together, a pattern emerged. Her empathy had become a vehicle for self-neglect. She had confused attunement with entanglement, and in doing so, she had built no altar for her own spirit. Slowly, we began the work not of lessening her empathy, but of rooting it, of pulling it down from the clouds and into the soil of her own being. She began to feel her own feelings, not just those she inherited, absorbed, or mirrored. And in doing so, she became not less empathic, but more whole. This, too, is your task, to become whole, not holy. Wholeness is the union of opposites, light and shadow, self and other, silence and expression. Holiness without wholeness is hypocrisy. You will find, as you journey inward, that your empathy sharpens, not through increased absorption, but through increased clarity. You begin to feel this, you begin to listen without merging, you begin to care without collapsing, and in that, you reclaim what the ancient alchemists called the soul niger, the black sun, the dark light that birthed true transformation. You see, even the most luminous empathy must be forged in fire. It must pass through the crucible of the self. Otherwise, it remains sentimentalism, codependency, a spiritual bypass disguised as compassion. But once it is transmuted through the fires of self-awareness, it becomes the very thing that heals the world without destroying the soul. And still, we are not finished. For there is another layer to this mystery, a deeper tide that pulls at the spirit of the modern empath. It is this: in an age of overstimulation, where every wound is broadcast, every tragedy made visible, the sensitive soul finds no rest. You are not only carrying the pain of your family, your lover, your friends. You are carrying the collective grief of a planet in crisis. You are attuning to the chaos of the age. And if you do not create ritual boundary and solitude, you will drown. Yes, even the mystical must learn discipline. I urge you now to remember the ancient ways, not the dogmas, but the inner practices. Solitude, dream work, shadow dialogue, symbolic thinking. The language of the unconscious is not rational. It speaks in poetry, in images, in paradox. And it will teach you how to feel without falling apart, how to be this pain without becoming it. In one dream, I saw the world as a vast lake. The empath was standing on the shore, arms open, heart wide. Every tear shed across the world fell into that lake, and the water rose higher and higher. At last, it reached the empath's feet, then their knees, then their chest, and still they did not move. They did not build a boat. They did not seek shelter. They wept with the lake until it consumed them. But beside that lake, hidden behind a veil of trees, there was a quiet cabin, a hearth, a journal, a dream catcher, a space where the empath could return, not to reject the world's pain, but to process it, to empty, to remember that they are not the world's savior, but its witness, and that sometimes to witness is enough. So let me offer you this, before we continue further. Find your cabin, build your rituals, create space within yourself where no one else is allowed to enter, not because you are selfish, but because the sacred demands sanctuary. You are not here to be consumed by the pain of others. You are here to be transformed by it, and then to offer back your wisdom, not your exhaustion. And perhaps that is the greatest difference. Empathy given from exhaustion breeds resentment. Empathy given from wholeness creates healing. One is a slow death, the other, a sacred gift. Let us pose it again, not because the teaching ends, but because the soul needs time to digest. These are not mere ideas I speak of. These are living truths carried in your body, etched in your dreams, whispered in your moments of stillness. You know them already. I am only reminding you. Shall we continue into the deeper waters? And so we continue, not down a path of instruction, but further into the labyrinth. the place within you where symbols pulse and shadows whisper. Because it is here in the interior wilderness that you will finally begin to grasp the true weight and meaning of your empathy, not as an identity, but as an initiation. You were not born merely to feel. You were born to become. Let us now speak of the soul's alchemy, of what happens when pain, which you have so often absorbed from others, is not transmuted. When it sits inside your emotional body like unrefined oil, it corrodes, it distorts, it attaches itself to your projections and becomes indistinguishable from your self-image. The empath, who once served as a mirror for others, slowly forgets that they too possess a face of their own. Have you noticed how often those with the deepest sensitivity speak in the language of should I, should help, I should be available, I should understand? And behind every should is the unconscious hand of an archetype, not the divine, but the distorted, the tyrant mother, the guilt-wielding priest, the shaming parent. These forces are not necessarily literal people. They are internalized figures, psychic echoes that demand perfection, performance and perpetual sacrifice. And so you overextend, overgive, overfeel, not because your heart is boundless, but because your inner voices will not let you rest. You are trying to atone for something, perhaps an ancient abandonment, perhaps a betrayal not even your conscious mind remembers. Perhaps the inherited guilt of generations that came before you who were never allowed to feel empathy, then becomes your penance. You absorb the pain of others in an unconscious attempt to redeem your own. But my dear friends, let me say this with the utmost clarity. Your empathy is not currency. You do not owe the world your depletion. You do not need to feel pain in order to prove your love. This myth must be broken, shattered, like the brittle persona it feeds. The soul does not flourish through self-sacrifice alone. It flourishes through integration when the inner child and the wise Oda, the wounded shadow and the luminous self, all sit at the same table and are fed. I once knew a man who was deeply intuitive, so much so that he could walk into a room and know who was grieving before a single word was spoken. He called it a gift, but I watched how it wore him down. Slowly, his identity became woven entirely from the emotions of others. He feared saying no. He feared being alone. He feared that if he didn't constantly help, he would vanish. That is the danger of empathy without individuation. The self becomes a ghost in its own life story. One day, he told me of a recurring nightmare. In it, he was in a village at war. People screamed for help. Bodies lay wounded, and he ran from one to the next, trying to bandage their wounds. But no matter how fast he moved, the cries never ceased. The war never ended. At last, he fell to the ground, exhausted. And there, in the silence of his collapse, a voice whispered, "Who will tend to you? This dream," I told him, was not punishment. It was prophecy. It was his unconscious calling him home. And perhaps that question is being whispered to you now. Who will tend to you? The answer, of course, lies not in another's hands, but in your own willingness to return to the self you have abandoned, the one beneath the mirror, the one who exists even when no one else is watching, needing, suffering. Let us now consider the symbol of the well in ancient myth and dream. The well is the place of both danger and renewal. To lower the bucket into its dark waters is to risk descent, but also to draw up the very source of life. This is the empath's task. You must descend into yourself, not to wallow, not to escape, but to retrieve your essence when you live perpetually on the surface, skimming the emotions of others. You begin to forget that you too possess depth, your own grief, your own rage, your own divine fire. Do not fear these things. The world has taught you to feel for others, but it has not taught you how to feel for yourself. That is the work now, to feel your own grief as sacred, to allow your anger to carve boundaries, to honor your exhaustion as a signal from the divine. This is not selfishness. It is self-possession, the very foundation of all authentic compassion. Only the self-possessed soul can love without losing itself. Only the rooted heart can touch another without breaking. You are not meant to be empty. You are meant to be a vessel. Yes, but not a cracked one. Repair the vessel. Seal the fractures with gold, as the Japanese once did with their broken pottery kintsugi. Let your restoration be visible. Let your scars be sacred. They are not signs of failure, but of resurrection. The mystics knew this. They withdrew into silence, not because they lacked love, but because they knew that silence is the womb of truth. If you are to be a true empath, one who heals not through exhaustion, but through presence, you must cultivate silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the deep inner stillness where your own voice returns to you. Do you remember your voice? Not the one shaped by what others needed. Not the one trained in empathy and diplomacy, but the raw, primal voice of your soul. The one that sings in dreams, the one that howls in moments of sacred rage, the one that speaks not from the lips, but from the bones. Find it again. Speak to yourself the way you have spoken to others with tenderness, patience, reverence. Hold your own hand in the darkness. Rock your own body when it trembles. Place your own name on the altar. This is not regression. It is the holy reversal. The moment when the giver becomes the receiver, and when you do this, something changes. You begin to feel others from a place of fullness, not deficit. Your empathy becomes sharper, not softer. You intuit with clarity, not compulsion. You give not because you must, but because you can, because you are no longer driven by invisible ghosts of guilt and shame, but guided by the still voice of the self, and that self, capital S, is the center of the mandala, the union of opposites, the reconciler of paradox, the wellspring of true healing. It is not exhausted by empathy. It is empathy in its highest form, divine, luminous, discerning. You are not here to be everything for everyone. You are here to become whole, and from your wholeness, the world will drink. Do you understand good? Let us take one final breath, deep into the diaphragm of your being, and listen. Listen not to me, but to the part of you that has waited patiently through every crisis, every collapse, every moment of beautiful care for others. That part now. Ask for your gaze. Let it speak. And now, we arrive at the threshold, the final gate in this descent, and return for all true journeys. As you well know, follow the arc of the mythos, the departure, the initiation, and the return. And what is it that you are returning to, you who have carried the pain of others for so long? You are returning not merely to the self, but to the authentic center of your being, where empathy no longer drains you, but flows through you like the living waters of a spring, unpolluted by the false needs of the world. You see, there is a silence in the soul that exists beyond exhaustion, a silence not born of depletion, but of integration. It is the silence that comes when the inner voices have been listened to, not silenced, when the abandoned parts of the psyche, the neglected child, the exiled shadow, the numinous archetype, have all been brought to the table and seen, not judged. Then, and only then, does the empath rise, not as a savior, not as a sacrifice, but as a sovereign, You must understand the radical nature of this to feel deeply and still remain rooted in your own being. It is one of the greatest spiritual acts of our time. We live in an age of noise, of mirrors, of performative empathy. But the one who has passed through the fire of their own suffering and emerged with discernment, that one is rare, that one is powerful, that one can walk through the pain of others without losing the architecture of their own soul. And so, I ask you again, are you willing to be that one? Are you willing to stand at the edge of the world's grief and not collapse into it? Are you willing to carry the torch of consciousness into the dark woods? Not to rescue others, but to illuminate the path home for those who are ready. This is what it means to be a wounded healer, made whole, not perfect, not invincible, but whole. And in wholeness, there is energy, there is breath, there is the resurrection of vitality that comes not from rest alone, but from the reclamation of what you once gave away too freely. Your presence. Presence. My friends, it's the rarest form of love. Not fixing, not absorbing, simply being. And when you are fully in yourself, you will see that others no longer drain you. Their pain moves through you, not into you. Their confusion no longer entangles your clarity. Their chaos no longer disturbs your rhythm, because you are no longer a sponge. You are a soul, a vessel, a center from which the sacred flows and to which it always returns. Let us speak now of boundaries, not the hard, rigid walls of fear, but the conscious, loving contours of the self. A boundary is not a rejection, it is a declaration. This is who I am, and this is where I end. And it is precisely that clarity that allows you to re-enter the world. Not with guilt, but with grace. I often told my patients that individuation, the process of becoming who you are, requires the courage to disappoint those who have mistaken your empathy for availability. You will disappoint them, and it will hurt. But you must remember, your purpose is not to be endlessly accessible. Your purpose is to be authentically alive. Even the archetype of Christ, so often misused to glorify self-sacrifice, contains within it moments of fierce solitude. The desert, the mountain, the garden of agony, the silence before the miracle. These are not failures of compassion. They are the prerequisites for it. To retreat is not to abandon. It is to recalibrate. To withdraw is not to betray. It is to remember. Remember what? That you are human and divine. That your nervous system has limits. That your heart was never meant to carry the sorrows of the world alone. Do not try to be the ocean. Be the spring. Nourish what you can. Let what you cannot flow past you. And in this way, empathy becomes not your identity, but your offering. It is something you do, not something you are. And like all sacred acts, it must be chosen, never coerced, never expected. You will know when you have healed your empathy, because your body will speak differently. Your shoulders will not ache after listening. Your chest will not tighten when a friend cries. Your sleep will no longer be haunted by the unfinished stories of others. You will move through the world with feeling, but no longer fused to it. And that, dear soul, is freedom. Let us not forget the great paradox of healing. What once wounded you becomes the very gateway through which others are healed. But the wound must be tended, it must be seen, it must be held in loving consciousness until it no longer defines you. Only then can it be transformed from infection to initiation. In that transformation, your empathy becomes clean, clear, sacred, no longer tied to guilt, no longer driven by compulsion, but moved by wisdom. You begin to ask, not what do they feel, but what is mine to carry? Not how can I help, but is my presence enough? Not how can I save them, but how can I witness them without losing myself. This is spiritual adulthood, and it is what the world needs now. Not more martyrs, but more whole souls who have touched the abyss and chosen to rise. You are not here to bleed endlessly. You are here to birth something sacred, and the labor of that birth is messy, exhausting, holy, but it ends in life, not in burnout. So let me leave you with one final image, a dream I once had in the depths of my own weariness. I stood in a vast forest filled with silent trees. The sky above me pulsed like breath, and in the center of that forest there was a woman made of light. She carried a bowl of water. People came to her wounded, broken, weeping, and she gave them the water, not from her veins, not from her tears, but from a spring that flowed endlessly behind her. That spring was herself. She was whole, she was radiant. She had boundaries made of gold, and so can you. Drink now from your own well. Rest now in your own arms. Feel now not everything, but only what is yours to feel. And let the rest return to the earth. You are not alone. You never were. The self has been waiting. Welcome home.